How many books do you think you have right now in your house that you haven't actually read? Now, if you're like most people, it's probably over 50% of the books that you have in your house you haven't read. But let me ask you another question. How many books do you still find yourself shopping for, online or in an actual shop, and buying, even though you've got many at home which you haven't actually read? Again, if you're like a lot of people, you'll find that's a problem. You may even be smiling to yourself as I talk about it. I know I have this problem. Well, in this video, I want to take a look at the problem of buying books as opposed to reading them and how to actually get down to reading them. I'm going to give you one specific tip that will help you start reading the books you've got. I've used it for myself. It works in lots of areas of life, but it does work with books as well. So, having said that, let's dig in, shall we? One of the things that got me thinking about the amount of books we often accumulate without reading was a strange fact that I heard on the radio, that apparently in the UK, the average household has 20 cookery books. And I thought, is that true? So I went and found where our cookery books were, and we had 24. So, you know, close to the average. Now, of those 24, I don't think we've gone through most of them. And that reminded me, talking to a lot of you in the Patreon community, listening to the comments written down in the YouTube videos, how many people say, oh no, more books, I keep buying books, and I don't get round to reading most of them. That is not a modern phenomenon. Now, there's actually a word for it. You've probably heard the word bibliophile. Well, a bibliophile is someone who is passionate about books and reads them. There is another word called bibliomania or a bibliomaniac. That's when someone collects books, reads them, keeps them to the detriment of their environment or even their relationships. They're so devoted to books. That's bibliomania. But there's a Japanese word, tsundoku. Now I'm going to put on the screen from Wikipedia what this actually means. Tsundoku is the phenomenon of acquiring reading materials but letting them pile up in one's home without reading them. The term is also used to refer to unread books on a bookshelf meant for reading later. I suppose today we'd call it the TBR, the to be read list, that pile of books we've acquired to read later. What's interesting about this word, tsundoku, is that it's not a modern phenomenon. The word itself was coined in the Meiji period of Japan. That's the late 1800s into the early 1900s. So this has been a phenomenon amongst people for quite some time. And why is that? And what can we do about it if we're swamping ourselves in more and more books? What damage does buying more and more books actually do to our reading? What I want to talk about first, before introducing you to a remarkable tip that helps with contented reading, just want to talk about the difference between having read a book and the act of reading. Now, most of us, and I've talked about this in numerous videos before, you know it's a phrase of mine, most of us want to have read a book rather than to actually read a book. They're two very different things. When you have read a book, think of how you feel. We've all done it. You feel a sense of accomplishment. You feel a sense of satisfaction. You feel a sense of closure because an author writes the book to come to some form of closure in itself. It may be open-ended, but the idea has been encapsulated. You may feel informed. You may feel elevated, ecstatic. You may feel melancholy and inwardly thoughtful. Those are all pleasant experiences in their own way. And when we consider getting a book, it's those feelings that we're thinking of. But what's the actual experience of reading like? How many books have you read which you would say at the end of it, you've absolutely loved them, but at times during the book, it's been a bit of a slog. Or you've put it down and you feel a little bit tired to pick it back up again. There's such effort in reading a book. It's not quick. And I think that's not unique to modern humans, the 21st century. All of us want to acquire things faster than we do. but I do think it's exacerbated by our society. Now that we have social media, most people get their news in quite literally 30-second sound bites. So really they're not getting news, they're getting someone's opinion and they haven't filtered it through any facts. It's a very dodgy way to learn. But we're so used to getting things quickly. If you want to fix, I had to fix something on my car, okay? Normally I'd have to read a manual and work it all out. I went on YouTube and found a 4-minute video which told me exactly how to do what I wanted to do. That was great, instant fix. And that's wonderful. But books take time. And as they're works of art, something we talked about in my Patreon community, we had a recent video on considering literature as art. Art tends to develop a lot more. It stretches out in scope to grasp hold of some facet of life or meaning. And to explore it, well, that exploration takes time. And books require us to immerse ourselves into them. Of course, you have the short story, but novels we're talking about. So it takes effort, and at times it can slow down. Count of Monte Cristo is an example. Whacking great book. Wonderful to read, actually a great romp, but there are some sections through that book where everything sort of almost grinds to a halt. And you can understand why sometimes people fold it and never get back to it, because we want to have read rather than engage in the act of reading a lot of the time. Now, let's link this desire to have read to collecting books. When we shop for books, we actually get a dopamine hit. We've all heard of retail therapy. You feel better when you're buying something. Acquisition of something new has a positive, uplifting, exciting effect on us. The reason for that is normally because we imagine our life being better with what we've bought. Most of our purchases, if we're honest, end up just collecting dust somewhere. The same when shopping for books. We pick up a book with a beautiful cover, and covers are so wonderful today, that they give you the imagination, they give you the dream, they drift you into a world where you can just sense the story that's in there, and you want to know what that story is. And we jump to the conclusion in our mind of how wonderful would it be to know what happens in this and to have gone through that journey with them. We're thinking about how we'll feel at the end of reading. We get home, we start reading chapter 1. I bet millions of people worldwide have read many a chapter 1 and not the rest of the book. And then life gets in the way. We get distracted, whether it's by necessary jobs or new interests or another book because the cover to that one looks so much better, or a video we've watched. And so the act of reading, we don't quickly get the satisfaction that we get on the hit of buying it. And that's based on our remembering how good we feel when we've got a whole story. Because when a whole story is pulled together, it's so satisfying. The length of time it's took to read pays off beautifully. But we always have to wait. And that's the main reason why we buy more books than we actually read. So, what's the problem with that? Well, obviously, there's one big problem. We don't read the books. Now, a lot of us want to read to expand our soul, to expand our understanding of things. If we don't actually read those things, we're not going to get any of that, and it becomes demoralizing. All you've got, if you buy lots of books, is really expensive wallpaper. I worked it out earlier, at least in British terms, you're looking at about £5.50 per inch. If you stack bookshelves full of books that you don't read, that's the kind of wallpaper you're paying for. So that's very expensive. How do you go about reading then instead of buying? First of all, make a commitment to stop buying if you've got sufficient books to read. Another thing you can do is, of course, you want to learn about more stories, and some of those will appeal to you. Keep a book where you just write down the titles of stories that appeal to you. And if you want to read 5 books and then allow yourself to buy a new one, think about this. It may not sound as exciting, but wouldn't you prefer to know what those other 5 books actually were about? To have gone through the journey, to have met the characters, to have had your own inward self probed and tested and titillated. That's much better. But how do we overcome the, I've got to read. It's hard work. Well, I'm going to share with you this fantastic tip which revolutionized my life. You can use it in practically anything. You can use it in doing household chores. That's actually where I learned it. But it applies to books really well. And stick around because I'll tell you where to find a second tip, which over 100,000 people have seen and enjoyed. I'd just like to interrupt here to give you a word from our sponsors, which is you, the viewer. If you enjoy this kind of content and appreciate the effort that goes into making videos and all the reading behind it, and you'd like to support my channel, consider going either to my Patreon community, where you can pay per month and get exclusive access to exclusive videos, or if you want, you can just give me a small donation at my Buy Me a Coffee page. The links will be down below. I thoroughly and truly appreciate any support that you give me. So let's get back to our video. Understand where boredom and frustration come from. Frustration especially. Frustration happens when we are wanting to do one thing but have to be engaged with something else. I want you to take time to think about that for yourself, to visualize that for yourself in your life. Have you ever been engaged in a task, washing the dishes, but what you want to do is go to the beach because it's a lovely sunny day? Now, maybe you could go to the beach later, but you're just scrubbing all the narky because you don't want to be doing this horrible chore. It's because your mind is elsewhere. It's because you feel this right now is a hindrance to where you want to be. Once I understood that, it became amazing how easy it was to deal with the problem. I simply had to switch off from focusing on what I wanted to do further in the day. Even though I may have wanted to do it right now, I would say to myself, well, right now, I'm doing the dishes. Or, right now, I'm reading a book. I'm reading a chapter, 2 chapters of this book, and that is what I am doing now. We may at times feel, oh, I want to get to the end of the book. Do you see where the frustration is? You want to be somewhere, but you have to do something first. But if you just switch off the thing that's further away and go, it's okay, right now I'm just reading this, and other things I want to do, I will be able to do them later. So if it's chores, once I've got these out the way, I will be able to do that thing later. And so I know I'll get there, I'm just going to put it away for now. And some would call this mindfulness, just being present in the moment. And it's amazing, you begin to enjoy what you accomplish. What's fascinating about this is we've all experienced this. If you've ever washed the dishes, hoovered the floor, cleaned the bathroom, tidied the whole kitchen, whatever it may be, if you've just got on with it, when you actually finish the task, how do you feel? You may feel physically tired, but you think, oh, I've achieved something. It may not be the most groundbreaking thing in the world, but you actually have something for your work. And there is a sense of satisfaction. Interestingly, when we get those things out of the way, we find we've got time to now focus on something we want to do. And we've got great satisfaction through the day. I began to find I could enjoy almost any chore when I began to practice this. The same applies to reading. When you sit down, here's a book, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. So 1,100 pages. If I were to think, oh, all this wonderful information that's in here, I can't wait to get to the end and know it all and everything. If I'm waiting for that feeling, and I'm even this far, what's that, 250 pages in, the rest that's left could make me think, oh, come on. I'm focusing on what I want to have achieved rather than what I'm doing right now. So if I just sit and say to myself, I'm reading 5 chapters. Or I have an hour that I've devoted to reading this book. And I'm not going to worry about finishing the book. I'm just going to enjoy the 1 hour I have with it now. And when you can learn, this may take practice, by the way. It may sound obvious, but many a thing in life is obvious, but we don't do it. We resist it. When you switch off the, I want to have achieved this, or I want to be doing that, you can focus on the present, and once I've finished an hour of reading this, I feel really happy. I've got things that I've taken away from the book. And before you know it, the whole book eventually is read through. And you can do that with any book whatsoever. So the key to stopping buying books and actually doing what you intended to do when you bought them, which is to read them, the key is to stop looking for or focusing on the satisfaction you get when finishing a book, and just accept that right now I'm just reading this. And interestingly, when you do that, you'll find, because writers are good, especially in the classics, each chapter is in itself engaging, but it becomes frustrating or dull if you're waiting to get to the end, because you're frustrated. Remember what I said? Frustration is when you want to be doing one thing, but you have to do something else before. If you're wanting to have finished reading, then the chapters you're reading are not going to be enjoyable. But if you just change your mindset, you can start to enjoy every book. That helps you get into a habit of reading. And a habit of reading is what will get you reading lots of books. As in, when I say lots, the amount you want to. They would just stack automatically. Now, how much should you read? How can you keep a steady schedule? I'm going to give you a link to a video I did recently, which you may not have seen. And it's one tip that will help you accomplish reading way more books. And I have had massive feedback on this. I have had so many comments thanking me for this one tip and how people have already mopped up some books because of it. So I'll put a link to that. However, I thought I'd just come on here and share this one mental idea with you. It's a psychological, it's a mind approach that you need to have really if you're to read books. Remember, next time you want to buy a book, you're buying it because you want to have had the experience of reading it. But if there's already a load of books at home that you haven't read, don't buy a new one just yet. And there's a simple reason for that, just a little added bonus here. What we're doing when we buy that new book is we're getting an instant dopamine hit. For that brief moment, we're imagining what we'll feel like at the end of reading it. And that is totally different to the act of reading it. But our subconscious doesn't know the difference. At the moment that you're dreaming about, oh, if I've read that, that'll be a wonderful story, the subconscious doesn't know the difference. It's the same principle for when you watch a scary film, right? You're sitting in a scary film and there's a person on the screen and you can see they're coming to get the protagonist. And, maybe it's a mad axe murderer in the house. And you are tense. Now, in truth, do you know that that's a film? Of course you do, logically. Do you know that the person's stuck in a screen? They're not going to climb out and get you. You logically know that. So why do you feel tense watching these films? Because the subconscious, the mind in imagination, doesn't know the difference. And so you react as though you're there. It's the same when you go shopping. You react with the anticipation of what could be accomplished by what you've bought. But the actual effort of achieving it is totally different. So, if you want that tip, go back in this video and apply it. And share this with any book groups that you're in, or if you're in college and you're struggling to get through books, maybe use this tip for yourself. And that's it. Leave your thoughts down below. And until the next time, I wish you joy in whatever you're reading, as opposed to buying.